The wind scraped dust across Isabella's cracked lips as she stumbled forward, a child on each side, their hands limp in hers. Lucia hadn't spoken in hours. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her eyelids fluttering as if even blinking was too much work. Mateo's shirt was torn, soaked with sweat, and streaked with blood from his feet. He didn't complain. He just kept walking because he knew if he stopped, Lucia would too, and she wouldn't get back up. Isabella had stopped feeling her legs 2 miles ago. The only thing keeping her upright was instinct, or maybe just guilt that her name, her blood, had put them in this place. Guilt that when their village burned, when her tio's men came with forged papers and rifles, she had no words, no power to stop them. Only the medallion against her chest, warm from her skin, remained. The circle crossed by 2 lines. Her mother called it the mark of the promise. But promises didn't feed starving children. Promises didn't stop men like Don Ignacio Salvatierra. A cough rattled out of Lucia's chest. Isabella dropped to her knees beside her heart, clawing at her throat. Lucia's lips were pale. She was dry. Empty. "Hold on, mi amor," Isabella whispered, her voice hoarse. "Just a little farther." But she didn't know if that was true. Mateo stared into the trees ahead, eyes narrowed. "There," he said. His voice cracked but carried weight. He pointed. Isabella turned, following his hand, and her heart jumped. A cabin. Tucked into a rocky bluff, half hidden by dry pines and shadow. Its timbers, dark and weathered, slanted slightly, as if it had grown tired of standing. But it was real. Not a mirage. Not a dream. Isabella pulled Lucia onto her back. The child barely stirred. Every step toward the cabin felt like dragging the world behind her. As they reached the door, her breath caught. On the thick wooden plank was a carved symbol, rough, fading, but unmistakable. A circle. 2 lines. Just like the medallion. Her knees weakened. Her mother's voice whispered in memory. "If the world ever turns on you, find the mark." That place was meant to be yours. Isabella raised her fist and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. A pause. Then slow, heavy footsteps creaked across the wooden floor. The door cracked open just enough to show a single eye. Dark. Steady, not the eye of a stranger. This was the eye of someone who'd watched too much to be surprised by anything anymore. "Please," Isabella said, barely louder than a breath. "We haven't eaten in 5 days." The door didn't move. The silence felt like it could crush her. She turned slightly so he could see Lucia limp on her back, and Mateo, thin arms shaking beside her. The eye narrowed, then disappeared. For a moment she feared he'd walk away. Then the door creaked open wider. "Come in," the man said. His voice was deep low, as if unused for days, weeks, maybe longer. Isabella didn't thank him. She didn't have the strength. She crossed the threshold and felt the first sting of warmth. The cabin was small but solid. 1 cot. A stone hearth, cold and black. 2 chairs, bare walls. It smelled of pine and ash. She laid Lucia down carefully on a folded blanket beside the fire pit. Mateo sank to the floor, breathing heavily, eyes darting to the man by the door. The man closed it with a slow push and leaned against it. He was tall, with skin weathered by sun and wind hair braided back. An old knife hung at his side, not for show. His eyes scanned each of them in silence. "What are you doing here?" he asked. No hostility, just suspicion. Isabella reached beneath her blouse and pulled out the medallion. She held it up. He stepped forward slowly. His gaze locked on the metal, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out and touched it with 2 fingers. His hand was steady, rough like bark. He let go and looked her in the eyes. This cabin was built with wood your father gave my people. My father is dead. I know. She waited, heart-pounding, not knowing what to expect. You can stay tonight, he said. Isabella's legs gave out. She sank to the floor beside Lucia, who whimpered softly. Matteo slid beside her, keeping his eyes on the man. The stranger turned and moved to a trunk in the corner. He pulled out a hard loaf of bread and a strip of dried meat, placed them on the table. Eat slow, he said. You'll be sick if you don't. Isabella didn't trust it, but hunger left no room for caution. She tore the bread in thirds, handing the smallest piece to Lucia. The child chewed with sluggish desperation. Matteo's eyes welled as he swallowed each bite whole. Isabella took hers last. Each chew scraped her dry throat like sandpaper. But it was food. It was something. The man stood by the hearth, watching. You have a name, she asked finally. He didn't answer at first. Then Naok. She repeated it under her breath. He didn't offer more. Naok moved to the fire and struck flint until orange light danced in the stone hearth. Warmth spread slowly. Lucia curled closer to it. Matteo's head dropped to her shoulder. Still, Naok stood unmoving. You don't trust us, she said. I don't trust anyone. Then why did you let us in? Naok's gaze lingered on the sleeping children. Because they didn't ask for this war. Isabella's throat tightened. She nodded, staring at the fire. The room was quiet, except for the crackle of flame. Outside, the wind blew through the trees, and with it came the faint sound of hooves. Naok's hand drifted to the knife at his side. His eyes shifted to the window. Isabella didn't move. He turned back to her. Just tonight, he said, voice harder now. At first light, you leave. Isabella looked at Lucia's hollow cheeks, at Matteo's bleeding feet. Then she looked at the man who had opened his door to strangers in a land where that could get you killed. 3 days, she said. Naok didn't respond. He just watched the fire and waited. 3 days, that's all. After that, you're on your own. Naok's words hung in the air like smoke refusing to rise. He stood near the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, eyes unreadable. The fire crackled behind him, throwing shifting shadows across the cabin walls. Isabella sat on the floor, back against the far wall, Lucia asleep with her head in her lap. Matteo leaned against the hearth crust of bread, still clutched in his fingers, though he'd stopped eating. His eyes never left Naok. Isabella took a slow breath, steadying herself. 3 days was more than she'd expected, but far from enough. Thank you, she said softly. Naok gave no reply. He stepped away from the door, knelt by the fire, and added another log. Orange light washed over his face, deepening the scars along his cheek and the hard lines that life had carved around his mouth. The silence in the room was thick with everything unsaid. Outside, the wind hissed through the pines and the faint calls of night animals echoed between the hills. Inside, only the fire moved. Isabella reached into her bag, a battered cloth satchel she'd sewn from scraps, and pulled out the medallion again. She traced her thumb along its edges. The symbol had worn smooth over time, but she still felt the weight of it. Not just its metal, but the burden of what it meant. Her mother had given it to her the night she died, slipping it into her palm as they hid in a cattle shed, whispering, "If the world burns, find the mark." Now the mark had opened a door, but it wouldn't keep them safe. Lucia stirred in her lap, moaning softly. Isabella tucked the girl's tattered shawl closer around her, brushing sweat from her forehead. too warm. Her fever hadn't broken. "Do you have water?" she asked Nyoke. He pointed to a clay jug by the window. Isabella nodded her thanks and poured a little into a tin cup, cradling Lucia's head as she sipped. The girl swallowed weakly. "She's sick," Isabella said, not looking up. Nyoke didn't move. "She needs rest." "She needs more than that," Isabella snapped, then softened. "I need time. 3 days." She wanted to argue, wanted to scream, but she swallowed it. Nyoke stood and walked to a small shelf near the back wall. He pulled down a leather pouch and a bundle of dried leaves. Without a word, he filled a small pot with water from the jug, dropped the herbs inside and placed it over the fire. Isabella watched him in silence. "She'll sleep better," he said quietly. "That's all it'll do, even that was something." Mateo's voice broke the hush. "Who are you?" Nyoke looked over. His gaze flicked between Mateo's dirt-smudged face and Isabella's wary eyes. "My name is Nyoke," he said. "That's enough." "Where's the rest of your family?" the boy asked. Not rudely, just curious. Nyoke hesitated, then said simply on. No one asked more. Morning came slowly. Pale light leaked in through the narrow window, touching the worn wooden floor. The fire had burned down to embers. Isabella's back ached, and her mouth was dry, but Lucia's fever had lowered. She still slept, cheeks flushed, but peaceful. Nyoke was already outside. She found him crouched near the woodshed, carving something small from a branch of mesquite. He didn't look up as she approached. "You don't talk much," she said. He shrugged. "Words are just air. Sometimes they matter." His knife paused, then resumed. "Sometimes." She stepped closer, wrapping her shawl tight against the cold. "You said my father gave your people this wood." "He did." "You knew him," Nyoke nodded. "Did you like him?" Nyoke's hand stopped. His jaw worked for a moment before he said, "He kept his word. That's more than most." She studied him. "He left me this medallion. Said the place marked with the symbol would protect me." "Protection isn't in the wood," Nyoke said. "It's in the choices people make." Isabella glanced at the cabin. Smoke now trickled from the chimney. Mateo must have stoked the fire. Inside was warmth, safety, a roof, maybe even enough food to survive a few days. But beyond that, nothing. "My father promised more than protection," she said quietly. "He said this land would be mine." Nyoke stood, slipping the carved object into his pocket. "You'll need more than a promise to keep it." He walked past her toward the cabin. That evening a visitor came. Isabella was kneeling outside, scraping old blood from Mateo's torn shoes, when a sharp bird call echoed through the trees. Not a real one, too short, too precise. Nyoke was on his feet in seconds, hand already on his knife. He moved silently toward the tree line and vanished. Isabella pulled Mateo close and crouched low, her pulse thudding in her ears. Lucia sat near the firehead, turning slowly, eyes wide. 2 minutes passed. Then Nyoke reappeared, not alone. A woman followed him, tall, wrapped in layers of dark fabric, her hair silver at the edges. Her face was lined, proud, but kind. She carried a woven basket and a walking stick carved with symbols Isabella didn't recognize. "This is Ina," Nyoke said. "My aunt." Ina's eyes moved from Isabella to the children. "These are the ones," Nyoke nodded. Ina clicked her tongue. "They look like ghosts." "They're alive," Nyoke replied. Ina knelt beside Lucia and placed her hand on the girl's forehead. "Not for long if that fever stays." She looked at Isabella. "You feed her roots. I'll feed her spirit." Isabella didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. That night, Ina brewed a thick, bitter tea that smelled of pepper and soil. Lucia drank it with Ina's hand on her back, murmuring low words in a language Isabella didn't know. Matteo curled beside the fire, finally sleeping without twitching. Nyoke watched from the far side of the room. Ina pulled Isabella aside. "You know they'll come, right? The man who took your land." "He won't stop, I know," Isabella said. 3 days won't be enough, no." "Then why did you accept it?" Isabella looked at Lucia sleeping under a real roof. Matteo's breath steady, the fire warm. "Because it's more than nothing." Ina's eyes softened. "Maybe. But if you want more than 3 days, you'd better stop waiting for someone else to give it to you." She turned and went to sleep on a bedroll by the wall. At dawn, Naok stood outside staring east. The sky bled soft orange along the jagged hills. His knife was clean and tucked away, his arms crossed tight. Isabella stepped beside him. "You said 3 days," she said. He nodded. "I'll use every one." Nyoke didn't look at her. "Then don't waste them. Your father gave this land to 2 people, one with his blood, one with his promise." The third night fell heavy and windless, a silence so thick it seemed to press against the walls of the cabin. Outside, the pines stood still as stone. Inside, the fire had shrunk to coals, its warmth stretching only so far. Isabella sat in the corner, mending the seam of Matteo's torn sleeve, her needle moving through the cloth by feel more than sight. Ina snored softly on her bedroll. Matteo was curled near the fire, arms wrapped around himself. Lucia shifted in sleep, her breath steady but thin. Nyoke sat by the window, unmoving. His silhouette was rigid, outlined faintly by the dying light. Isabella had learned not to interrupt him when he sat like that, still as a mountain, listening for something others couldn't hear. She tied off the thread and set the shirt aside. Her back ached from days of tension, nights of half-sleep. Her hands were raw, and her mind ran loops of worry she couldn't stop. But beneath it all, something new had begun to grow. Not safety, not yet, but a kind of grounding, a root beginning to take. Lucia stirred again, frowning. She reached behind her and tapped at the floorboards. Her fingers drummed twice, then hit something with a hollow thud. Isabella blinked. Lucia turned toward her. "It sounds different," she murmured. "What does?" Lucia pressed her palm flat to the wooden floor. "Here." Isabella set aside the sewing and crawled closer. She tapped her knuckles on the board. It echoed not the dense thunk of solid wood, but something lighter, empty underneath. She looked over her shoulder. Nyoke hadn't moved. Quietly, she grabbed the edge of the board and tugged. It didn't lift. She braced her feet and pulled harder. The nails groaned, then gave with a sudden pop, and the board cracked loose. Dust billowed up. Inside, the dark space beneath something was wrapped in waxed cloth, thick with grime. Isabella reached in and pulled it out, heart hammering. She unwrapped the bundle with trembling fingers, revealing a set of papers, stiff yellowed with age, and a small leather-bound journal. The mark was etched into the cover, the circle and 2 lines. Nyoke turned, sensing the shift. "What did you find?" Isabella looked at him, unsure if she should speak. Then she held up the book and the folded parchment. These were under the floor. Nyoke crossed the room silently and knelt beside her. He didn't touch the papers, just stared. Isabella unfolded one of the documents. It was a map, hand-drawn lines of hills and rivers sketched in faded ink. But what caught her breath was the boundary lines, the land around the cabin. It had been marked, labeled, a name written in the bottom corner in familiar cursive, Don Sebastian Duarte. "My father," she whispered. The second paper was a letter written in that same hand. "To my daughter Isabella, and to my friend Naok of the Oodom. This land is not a gift. It is a trust. I leave it to you both, not as property, but as shelter. May it be a place where the hunted can rest, where truth is not decided by blood alone. Protect each other. SD." Naok reached out and touched the ink gently, as if confirming it was real. "He wrote this," Isabella asked, her voice shaking. Naok nodded slowly. "I was a boy when he came to our village. He brought timber seed water barrels, said it was the least he could do. My father didn't trust him. But your father came back 3 times, never took anything, only gave." He looked up at her. "He said when the world turns cruel, this place would belong to those who needed it most." Isabella blinked hard, willing herself not to cry. "All my life," she whispered, "I've felt like I didn't belong anywhere. Like I was nothing more than a mistake someone tried to cover with silence. And now this, your father gave this land to 2 people," Naok said. "One with his blood, one with his promise." Ina stirred and sat up, squinting into the firelight. "What's all this?" Isabella handed her the journal. Ina flipped through it, her mouth tightening. "This changes everything," she murmured. "If this gets in front of a judge..." But Don Ignacio already claimed the land, said I forged the documents, that I'm a bastard with no right to anything. Ina looked sharply at her. "You are a daughter with a signed deed, a map, and a witness who speaks for your father's intentions. That's more than most ever get." Naok stood and paced slowly. "He'll come looking for this land," he said. "He won't stop just because you have papers." "He already came," Isabella said. "He'll come again." Ina set the journal aside and rubbed her knees. "If we wait here, we lose. He has reach. Lawyers, soldiers, corrupt officials. But if we take this to someone honest..." Isabella looked up. Who? Naok answered. "There's a town north of here. Magdalena. A traveling judge comes once a month. They still listen there sometimes." Ina nodded. "And there's Padre Emiliano. He knew your father. If anyone remembers the deal, it's him." Isabella clutched the letter. "Do you think they'll believe me?" Ina gave her a long, steady look. "They'll believe the truth, if you have the spine to say it loud." Isabella exhaled slowly. She looked over at Matteo, asleep again, his arms around Lucia. The 2 of them had walked miles without food, without hope. They'd done it for her. She could do this for them. Naok stepped toward the door. "We'll leave before dawn." Isabella rose to her feet. Her legs trembled but held. Naok looked at her, eyes steady. "You'll need courage." "I have it," she said. She wasn't sure if it was true, but she said it anyway, because now there was no more hiding, no more begging, only standing. They're circling like wolves who smell warmth. The wind was changing. Naok stood at the edge of the bluff behind the cabin, eyes scanning the tree line. The air was too still. Even the birds had gone quiet. His hand rested on the hilt of his knife thumb, tracing the smooth curve of the handle. Below him, the path that led through the pines was marked not by accident, not by weather. Someone had stepped through their heavy boots, pressing deep into the soft earth. Twice. He crouched, fingers brushing the disturbed soil. Too wide for a coyote, too clumsy for a hunter. He looked up toward the west. The sun was beginning to lower. Long shadows crept across the dry grass. Naok turned back toward the cabin, his steps quick and silent. He entered without a word. Isabella looked up from the table where she was teaching Lucia how to write the letters of her name in the dust. Ina was slicing dried chilies near the hearth. Mateo sat by the open window carving a small wooden bird. Nyoke's face told them everything. "Tracks?" Ina asked. Nyoke nodded. "2 men. South Trail. Not ours." Isabella stood, heart starting to pound. "Scouts. Not scouts. Spies. They weren't hunting. They were watching." Ina dropped the knife onto the cutting board and wiped her hands on her skirt. "Then it starts." "What do we do?" Isabella asked. "We prepare," Nyoke said simply. He moved through the cabin, checking his bow, counting arrows, rewrapping the leather around his knife's grip. Isabella followed him out the door. The sky had darkened slightly, the clouds hanging low and reddish in the fading light. "I thought we had more time," she said quietly. Nyoke stopped at the woodshed and opened it, pulling out a coil of wire and a burlap sack filled with iron nails and small bells. "They're circling like wolves who smell warmth," he said. "They know someone's here. But they don't know who or how many. That's the only thing keeping them from striking." Isabella watched him unfurl the wire. "You've done this before." "Yes." "Did it work?" He looked at her, expression flat. "I'm still alive." She crossed her arms. "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It didn't stop them, but it slowed them down." They worked together into dusk, stringing the bells between trees, setting tripwires, camouflaging a pit near the east slope. Ina spread chili powder and crushed prickly pear thorns along the cabin's lower perimeter. Mateo followed close, handing her what she needed without being asked. Lucia sat inside with the journal drawing maps of what she imagined the land looked like when it was still whole. By the time the sun dropped below the hills, the work was done. The traps were hidden. The bells silent. They ate little that night. Dry tortillas, beans, and weak tea. No one said much. The quiet wasn't fear, it was calculation. Isabella felt it in her chest, the pressure of something building like thunder before it breaks. She couldn't sleep. She lay awake on her bedroll, watching the flames flicker low. The cabin's logs creaked softly in the breeze. Nyoke sat near the door, eyes open, bow across his lap. The firelight touched his face in uneven strokes. He hadn't spoken since dinner. Isabella stood slowly and crossed the room. "You should sleep," she said. He shook his head. She leaned against the wall beside him. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" "No. They don't need to, not yet." "Then why the traps?" "'Cause people get brave when they're certain you're weak." She looked down at her hands. They were blistered from digging. "Do you think I'm weak?" she asked. Nyoke turned his head, studying her. "No," he said finally. "But you've never had to fight a man who believes your life is worth less than his coin." "I've had to fight men who believed I was nothing," she said. "Not even worth the trouble of remembering." He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. At first light, they trained. Nyoke handed Isabella a worn rifle. He showed her how to clean it, load it, brace her shoulder. Her hands were stiff, but she learned quickly. Mateo practiced with a slingshot, hitting a gourd nailed to the fence post from 15 feet. Nyoke nodded once and said nothing. In the afternoon, they took turns watching the trails from hidden points above the valley. On the third day, Mateo whispered through the brush, "Nyoke. Horse dung. Fresh." Nyoke knelt beside it. His fingers sifted through the pile, still warm. "Within the hour," he said. He motioned for Mateo to stay low and wait. Then he climbed to a higher ridge and watched. Far across the brushland, just below the horizon, Two riders emerged between the trees. They didn't approach the cabin, just circled wide, slow eyes, scanning, watching. Naok narrowed his eyes. One wore a wide black hat. The other had a rifle across his saddle. Neither spoke. After a moment, they turned and rode back the way they'd come. Naok returned to the cabin after sunset. They know someone's here, he told Isabella, but they're not sure who or how many. She paced. If we leave now, we draw them. If we stay, they'll keep watching until they don't need to anymore. Ina spoke from the corner. Then we need a reason to leave. One they can't follow. What do you mean? Ina looked up. You need to disappear in plain sight. Go where law still breathes. Magdalena, you said the judge comes soon. Naok crossed his arms. It's a risk. It's the only one we have, Ina replied. Isabella stepped forward. Then we go. Naok met her gaze. It's not just travel. It's exposure. You'll walk into a town where Ignacio buys mouths and closes eyes. You sure? Isabella nodded. They came for my silence. I'm going to speak. That night, they packed only what they could carry, documents, food, the rifle. Ina prepared medicine for Lucia's cough and placed a small knife in Mateo's boot. At dawn, they set out under a gray sky, the hills quiet behind them. Naok led the way through the back path, avoiding the main trails. His eyes never stopped moving. Behind them, the bells in the trees remained still. But every step farther from the cabin twisted Isabella's gut. She knew what they were leaving behind, and what they might return to find gone. I kept the truth, but I buried it in fear. Magdalena unfolded like a wound. Isabella had only been there once as a child, riding beside her father in a wagon stacked with grain. It had seemed so big, then cobblestone streets, colored awnings, the smell of fresh bread and dust in the morning air. Now it felt smaller, cramped. The shadows too long, the gazes too sharp. People looked up as they passed. Some just curious, others cautious. A woman in a green shawl crossed herself when she caught sight of Naok. A shopkeeper leaned against his doorframe, watching them without blinking. Naok rode ahead with Lucia and Mateo, keeping their pace slow but steady. Isabella walked beside Ina, who had covered her hair and pulled her shawl low to hide her face. The basket Ina carried rattled with the sound of glass vials and dried leaves medicine, or the illusion of it. They reached the old plaza by midday. The bells of San Miguel rang out once. The church loomed in white and gold chipped at the corners, a reminder of the years that passed more than the faith that remained. A market hummed on the edge of the square, but no one dared to shout prices. Everything here was muted, like breath held too long. Naok dismounted, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "Where is he?" he asked. Isabella looked to Ina. "East side. Down the alley behind the notaries, if he's still alive." They made their way through the tight streets until they came to a narrow door set between two cracked adobe walls. The number above it was missing. Only a single broken horseshoe hung there, rusted through. Naok knocked. A few seconds passed. Then the door creaked open, just a hand's width. A man's eyes appeared bloodshot and sunken. "Quien?" Isabella stepped forward. "Miguel Carranza." "You knew my father." The door slammed shut. Naok's hand dropped to his knife, but Isabella raised hers. "Wait." She knocked again. "I'm not here to shame you. I'm here because I don't have anyone else." No answer. "I have the papers," she said louder. "The letter, the map, your seal." Silence. Then a slow, dragging noise as the bolt was pulled back. The door opened. Miguel Carranza looked nothing like the man Isabella remembered. He had once been sharp, clean-shaven, with quick eyes and a crisp voice. Now he was gaunt, his beard uneven, his hands trembling. He reeked of stale liquor and cloves. "You should leave," he muttered, stepping aside. "They watch everything now." Inside the room was dim and humid, cluttered with books, old ink pots, and broken pens. A single cot sagged beneath a torn blanket. Miguel collapsed into a chair like the weight of memory was too much to carry. Ina stayed by the door. Nyoke stood just inside, silent. Isabella laid the documents on the table. Miguel stared at them, his face twitching as if ghosts had risen. "She kept them?" he asked. "All these years I found them hidden in the floor," Isabella said. He picked up the map, smoothing it gently like it was a sleeping child. "I told him to burn it," he whispered. "Back then. When Ignacio started buying the judges, the sheriffs. Your father wouldn't listen." "He believed this land could matter," Isabella said. Miguel gave a bitter laugh. "He believed in too much." He looked up, eyes suddenly wet. "You look like him, but you speak like your mother. She had fight. She died for it." Miguel closed his eyes. "I kept the truth, but I buried it in fear." Isabella stepped closer. "Then unbury it." He hesitated. "Ignacio destroyed my village," she said. "Stole land that was never his. Ran us like animals through the desert. I'm not asking you to risk everything. Just enough to make them hear me." Miguel looked at Nyoke. "And you? What are you in this?" Nyoke didn't blink. "I'm the one who still lives there." Miguel lowered his gaze. "I made 2 copies," he said. "One I kept. The other I hid." He stood wobbling and crossed to a loose brick near the hearth. He pried it free with shaking hands and pulled out a metal tube sealed with wax. He unrolled the parchment inside. Another map. Another deed. Faded, but clean. "This is the original notarized version," he said. "Signed by your father. Stamped by the magistrate before he vanished." Isabella ran her fingers across the seal. "The traveling judge will be here tomorrow," Miguel said. "If we show him this along with your father's letter, it may be enough to halt Ignacio's claim, at least temporarily." But Ina asked. "But Ignacio's already sent word. I heard it through the barmaid. He plans to contest anything with forged testimony, false witnesses, and coin." "Will the judge take a bribe?" Nyoke asked. Miguel hesitated. "He's new, might not." "Might." "I'll speak first," Isabella said. "If I tell it plain before Ignacio poisons the room, maybe someone listens." Miguel looked at her, something stirring in his dull eyes. "You're braver than your father was at the end." "I'm more desperate," she said. He laughed, but there was no joy in it. "We'll meet at the municipal hall before the sun rises," he said. "Less eyes, less time for Ignacio to turn it." As they turned to leave, Miguel caught Isabella's arm. "I stayed quiet too long," he said. "That silence cost me everything." "Then don't let it cost me, too." They took shelter in a shed behind the church. Padre Emiliano let them in without questions, only a long look at Isabella, then at the children. He gave them bread, clean water, and a wool blanket for each of them. That night, Isabella sat beside Lucia, who curled under Ina's shawl, finally sleeping deeply. Nyoke sat across from her, sharpening his knife with rhythmic strokes. "You believe him?" she asked. Nyoke didn't stop sharpening. "He's broken. But broken men can still speak." Isabella pulled the medallion from beneath her collar and held it tight in her hand. "I'm tired of running," she said. "Then stop." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What if they don't listen?" Nyoke looked up, firelight catching in his eyes. Then we speak louder. Truth doesn't wear a suit. It walks in dust with broken shoes. They reached the municipal hall just before dawn, the sky still clinging to the last threads of darkness. Magdalena's streets were mostly empty, save for the grocer sweeping his doorstep and a drunk slumped against a lamppost. Nyoke led the way, silent and alert. Isabella walked behind him, her boots clicking against the stone like distant gunfire. She carried the leather folder pressed to her chest. Inside it, the deed, the map, and the letter with her father's name signed in a curling hand. Ina kept a hand on Lucia's shoulder. Matteo walked ahead of them, all stiff with purpose, his jaw clenched so tight it trembled. The hall itself was an old colonial building, with weather-worn columns and a sagging flag above its front steps. Miguel Carranza waited near the side entrance, eyes darting over every shadow. His coat was cleaner than the day before, his beard trimmed, but he still smelled faintly of fear. "They'll be here soon," he said, voice low. "The judge rides with a clerk and one guard. No entourage, no crowd." Isabella nodded. "And Ignacio, he'll show. With his lawyer, maybe more." Nyoke scanned the rooftops. "Anyone watching now?" Miguel shook his head. "No eyes that I can see. But that means nothing." They entered through the side, passing through a dark corridor that led into the chamber. The room was wide, built with wooden rafters and a stone floor worn smooth over decades of boots and petitions. A long table stood at the front beneath the window. A chair for the judge. A bench for the witnesses. 3 pews for anyone who dared to watch. Nyoke stood near the door, arms folded. Ina sat at the back with the children. Isabella took her place near the front. She had never seen a courtroom before. Not really. She imagined something grander, something clean. But this place reeked of history, sweat dust, smoke. Decisions made not with justice, but with tired hands and heavy pockets. Still, she held the folder tight. She hadn't come for grandeur. The judge arrived just as the first orange light hit the windows. He was younger than she expected, no older than 40. His face had not yet hardened, but his eyes carried weight. He entered without ceremony, nodding to Miguel, then to the room. "Let's begin. No audience, no press. Just 5 people and a rising storm of consequence." Miguel cleared his throat and began a recounting of the deed, the sealed agreement, the location of the land. He spoke clearly, voice steadier than Isabella had hoped. He offered the documents, presented the original seal, and described Don Sebastian's intent. The judge listened in silence, eyes skimming the papers. "Witnesses?" he asked. "I am one," Miguel said. "And this," he gestured to Isabella, "is the legal daughter of Sebastian Duarte, born of Dominga Ruiz." "There is no doubt." The judge turned to her. "You can speak for yourself." Isabella stood, legs trembling, palms damp. "I can," she said. He nodded. She opened the folder and laid the letter out, smoothing it with her fingers. She read it aloud slowly, her voice cracking only once. When she finished, she looked up at the judge and said, "I am not here to steal land. I am here because it was given not just to me, but to those who were promised safety there. My father believed land could be more than fences and titles. He believed it could be a refuge." The judge studied her. "Do you have others who lived on this land?" Nyoke stepped forward. "I do." "Name Nyoke Oodum." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Your people have no formal standing in land disputes." "Neither did mine," Isabella said sharply. "Until today." The doors opened hard. Ignacio Salvatierra entered in polished boots, his lawyer at his side, and 2 guards close behind. His presence spread like oil across water, slick, slow, choking. His face wore its usual performance of calm, but his eyes pinned to Isabella like knives. "I object to this proceeding," his lawyer said, stepping forward. "This is a false claim brought by an illegitimate child, supported by a disgraced notary and a tribal man with no citizenship." The judge didn't flinch. "The court will hear all evidence before considering objections." Ignacio stepped forward, voice smooth. "Let's not waste time. This girl's father signed nothing. I hold the deed to the land recorded and confirmed by the district office. If we start letting anyone with a story and a scribbled map claim land, we'll undo a century of order." Isabella stepped forward. "You forged that deed. You can't prove that." She held up her father's journal, opened it to the matching map. "Then why does mine predate yours by 10 years and carry the seal of a man you bribed into silence? Gasps might have erupted in a larger room. But here only the judge reacted, his mouth tightening. Miguel placed the notarized copy on the table. "That's my seal. Dated. Witnessed. I was there." Ignacio's lawyer scoffed. "This man drinks turpentine and talks to himself in the plaza." "I was silent," Miguel said softly. "Not wrong." The judge looked through the documents again, more slowly this time. "I will need time to verify these claims." Ignacio took a step forward, voice lowering. "While you verify my men hold that land, shall I continue planting flags while you count stamps?" The judge turned his gaze to Nyoke. "Is your home on this land?" "Yes." "Do you intend to defend it with or without papers?" Nyoke replied. The judge stood. "Until I issue a formal ruling, no one may disturb the property in question. That includes Don Ignacio or any of his men. This case will be re-examined in 2 days' time with witnesses from both sides." He looked at Isabella. "Stay near. Do not disappear." She nodded. The gavel struck once. As the others filed out, Ignacio leaned close to her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You think you've won something. But this town bleeds for me." She stared at him, chin raised. "Then maybe it's time it stopped bleeding." He smirked, turned, and walked away. Ina placed a hand on Isabella's back. "He's rattled. He's dangerous. So are we." They left the hall together, stepping into the full light of morning. Lucia took her hand. Mateo fell in step beside her. Nyoke walked just behind, always watching. And for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt the truth was not something buried in fear. It had legs. It had voice. It could stand. They don't come to argue. They come to erase. The sky was pale with heat by the time they left the plaza. The shadows were shrinking under the sun, and every surface in Magdalena had begun to sweat. They moved through side streets, skirts swishing boots, scuffing voices low. No one in town dared to look too long, but Isabella could feel it, eyes behind curtains, behind shutters, behind the thin slats of fences. Watching. Waiting. They stayed in the back room of the church again. Padre Emiliano had left out fresh bread and a basin of clean water, but he was nowhere in sight. Mateo dropped his bag with a thud and sat hard on the floor, wiping sweat from his face. Lucia took to the corner, small hands clutching a cloth doll Ina had stitched from old rags. She rocked quietly, humming to herself. Nyoke hadn't spoken since they left the courthouse. Isabella stood near the doorway, hand on the frame, watching the street beyond the iron gate. Her body was tight with tension, the way it used to feel before a storm hit the hill, air dry but charged. "Do you think he'll wait?" she asked. Ina snorted softly. "Men like Ignacio don't wait. They warn once. Then they break what they can't buy." Isabella turned. We have the judge's protection. Ina met her eyes. Protection written in a book no one here has read. Nayok finally spoke. They don't come to argue. They come to erase. Isabella looked at him. Then we don't leave. He shook his head. We don't stay here. That night, they did not sleep. They moved again quietly, with only what they could carry. Nayok led them out through the rear gate of the churchyard and across an abandoned irrigation ditch toward the edge of town. No one spoke. Even Lucia kept silent, her small feet moving carefully over the dry grass. They took shelter in an abandoned mill on the river's edge, its roof sagging, windows long gone. It offered no comfort, but it was hidden from the main roads, and the walls still stood. Nayok scouted the area before circling back. He crouched in the dust and drew a rough sketch of Magdalena with his finger. There are two paths out, if things go bad, he said. North to the arroyo or west toward the cliffs. Both rough, both open. But they split him. Why would he split his men? Isabella asked. He won't. Not if we make him think we're still in the town center. He looked at Mateo. Can you run? The boy nodded without hesitation. Nayok pointed to a low building near the church. There's a bell tower above the bakery. If you light a fire there, just smoke, it'll draw attention. I can do it, Mateo said, voice calm but eyes burning. No heroics, Ina said firmly. I'm fast, he replied. I'll be gone before anyone's close. Isabella put a hand on his shoulder. Be careful. I will. Before dawn, the town went still. Not quiet still. Even the animals sensed it. No roosters crowed. No dogs barked. The stillness was a warning, the kind that made old men glance at the sky and women keep their children close. Nayok moved first, vanishing into the dark with Mateo at his side. Isabella watched them go, her heart pounding in her throat. Ina stood beside her, arms crossed. He's just a boy, Isabella said. He's more than that, Ina replied. And you need to stop calling him just anything. They waited. Long minutes. Too long. Then a thin trail of smoke lifted into the dawn sky. A shout rose across the square. Then two. Then gunfire. Isabella stood. Nayok returned 5 minutes later, breathing hard, but unhurt. 3 of them chased the smoke, he said. 2 went for the plaza. 1 stayed behind. Where? Ina asked. Nayok pointed toward the west. Isabella tightened the strap on her satchel. Then that's our way. They moved quickly, Nayok ahead, Isabella with Lucia Anna covering the rear. The mill faded behind them as they followed the river's dry bed, footsteps muted by dust and weeds. They reached the edge of town just as the sun crested the hills. That's when the shot rang out. It hit the earth just feet from Nayok, kicking up dirt and stone. He dropped immediately, motioning them down. Ridge, he hissed. High ground. 1 shooter. They flattened, hearts thudding. Ina reached into her shawl and pulled out a tiny mirror, angling it toward the ridge. A flicker of sunlight caught metal. Ignacio's men, she said. Cowards hiding behind rocks. Isabella looked at Nayok. What do we do? He scanned the slope. There's a cut behind that ridge. If I draw him, you take the girl and go. No, she said instantly. We go together. You won't get another chance. We stay together. He studied her face. I said what I said, she repeated, fire in her voice now. Nayok gave a tight nod. Then we fight together. He reached into his pack, pulling out a wrapped bundle, a slingshot, several small stones, and a handful of jagged glass. He handed it to Ina. You've got the best aim. Ina raised an eyebrow. I haven't done this since I was 20. You still move like you're 20. Don't lie to me while I'm armed. They shared a thin smile. Nyoke moved low, keeping to the shadows flanking left. Isabella held Lucia close. Cover your ears, sweetheart. Just for a little while. Lucia obeyed. Aina stood aimed with care and let the first stone fly. It hit metal. The shooter ducked. Nyoke surged forward, crossing the open slope in seconds. Another shot fired but wide. Nyoke disappeared behind the ridge. There was a grunt, then silence. Then Nyoke appeared again, dragging a rifle and kicking a boot away. Clear, he called. Isabella let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. They didn't wait. They moved west, keeping to the low trails until Magdalena was nothing but a memory behind them, its buildings blurred by heat and distance. By midday, they rested under a twisted mesquite tree. Nyoke passed around water. Ina handed out tortillas, dry but filling. Lucia ate with both hands, silent but alert. Mateo sat with his back against the trunk, breathing hard, but smiling. Isabella looked around at them. Dust-covered, bruised, bone-tired, and alive. They came to erase us, she said. Nyoke met her eyes. Then we make sure we're not forgotten. Ina nodded. We make it to the judge. We finish this. Isabella looked out at the horizon, the land stretching wide and uncertain before them. We don't run anymore. And no one argued. The past doesn't die. It waits. By the time they reached the edge of the high valley, the sun had dipped behind the cliffs, casting long shadows across the road. The sky held the last pale light of day, the kind that made everything feel half real. Dust rose in small clouds beneath their boots, clinging to skin, to hair, to breath. They had walked for hours, quiet, deliberate steps, along the old cattle trail that once connected the ranch lands to the river basin. The silence was heavy but not fearful. It was the silence of people who knew what they had already survived. Lucia walked beside Isabella, her hand clasped tightly in hers. Mateo followed behind, head lowered, but pace steady. Ina was limping slightly. She'd twisted her ankle on a rock 2 miles back and refused to stop. Nyoke took up the rear as always, eyes scanning the slopes. At the mouth of the trail stood a dry-stacked stone wall and a rusted gate. Beyond it, an old adobe structure hunched low to the earth, half swallowed by mesquite and wind. The place had no name anymore. It had once been a way station, then a schoolhouse, then nothing. Now it would be their shelter. Nyoke pushed open the gate. It squealed like something waking from a long sleep. Inside the building was bare, just walls, a dirt floor, and the bones of a fireplace. But it stood, and that was enough. Ina eased herself down onto a stone bench. Feels like 100 years since I've sat without thinking I might have to run. Maybe we can rest a few hours, Isabella said, laying Lucia's shawl on the floor like a makeshift bed. Nyoke checked the door, the windows, the roof. Safe for now. But we keep watches. He nodded to Mateo, who stepped outside with him. Ina leaned back and closed her eyes. Lucia curled up the rag doll tucked under her chin. Her breathing slowed. Isabella sat on the floor, her legs stretched out. Her body ached from the journey, but she didn't feel tired, just worn in a different way. Like something had been scraped away layer by layer until only the most stubborn part of her remained. A breeze stirred the dust. From outside came the low murmur of Nyoke's voice, soft, measured, steady. He was teaching Mateo how to read tracks in the dark. She thought of her father. She thought of the last time she'd heard his voice sitting on the steps of his study, listening to him dictate a letter to some land commissioner whose name she hadn't remembered. He'd sounded confident then, measured, like nothing could touch him. But something had. Something always did. She stood and crossed to Ina. "Do you remember the day he died?" she asked softly. Ina opened her eyes, but didn't sit up. "I remember the night before." "What happened?" "He was afraid," Ina said. "First time I ever saw it in his face. He kept looking over his shoulder like someone might come knock on the door with a noose in one hand and a deed in the other. Did he know Ignacio was coming?" Ina nodded slowly. "Not just him, others. The men behind him. The ones who never show their faces, but always get what they want." "Why didn't he leave?" he said. "Land doesn't mean anything if you run from it." Isabella looked at the fireless hearth. "He stayed and died. I ran and lived." Anna reached for her hand. "You didn't run. You carried something with you." Isabella shook her head. "For years I thought I was just a stain on his name. He never saw you that way. I wish I'd known." "You still can," Ina said. "He's in the land, in what you're doing now." Outside, the sound of a rock rolling down the slope made both of them tense. Isabella went to the doorway. Nyoke stepped into view, rifle across his back. "It's just the wind," he said. "But something's watching. I can feel it." Isabella glanced at the hills. They looked empty, but she trusted him. "We stay here tonight?" she asked. "We'll leave before sunrise." Mateo came behind him, wiping dust from his face. "The well's dry, but there's a stream past the ridge if we need water." "We'll fill before we go," Nyoke said. They ate in near silence, jerky dried beans, hard tortillas softened by fire-warmed water. No one complained. The food was real, and so were they. After Lucia slept and Ina began to snore softly, Isabella sat with Nyoke near the doorway. Moonlight slid across the dirt floor like silver thread. "Why do you think Ignacio wants it so bad?" she asked. Nyoke didn't answer right away. "He doesn't," he finally said. "Not the land, not the soil. What he wants is the silence, the control. If someone like you can claim it, speak for it, make something out of it, then men like him lose the story they've been telling." "What story? That everything belongs to them, always has." She leaned her head against the wall. "The past doesn't die." Nyoke looked at her. "No, it waits." They sat like that for a while. No need for more words. Just before dawn, Isabella woke to the sound of low humming. Lucia was sitting upright, rocking slightly, the rag doll in her lap. She was singing a lullaby in a voice so soft, it barely reached across the room. Isabella rose and knelt beside her. "You okay, little bird?" Lucia nodded. He was outside. "Who the man with the gold ring?" Isabella felt her throat tighten. "When, just now. He didn't come in, just stood by the gate. Then he left." Isabella wrapped her arms around the girl, holding her close. Her skin was cold. She turned to Nyoke, who was already standing, rifle in hand. "We go now," he said. Ina was already rolling up her bedroll. Mateo was lacing his boots. No more sleep, no more hesitation. Isabella helped Lucia to her feet, wrapped the shawl tight around her shoulders. "Can you walk?" Lucia nodded. Nyoke stepped into the morning, gray eyes alert. He looked to the hills, to the trail behind them, to the wide land ahead. Isabella stepped beside him. "They know we're not running anymore," she said. Nyoke gave a grim smile. "Then let them chase ghosts." And they moved. He said, "I could choose to be a wound or be the scar." The trail to Los Molinos twisted through narrow canyons scattered with mesquite and brittle oak. The path was worn but empty, dry as a sun-bleached bone, and quiet in that uneasy way deserts get before something breaks. They moved fast, with no time to waste. Nioke set the pace, scanning every ridge and outcrop. Isabella carried Lucia for half the morning, despite the fire in her legs. Mateo never asked to stop. The closer they came to the borderlands, the more everything tightened airtime hearts. Los Molinos wasn't a town so much as a handful of buildings clinging to the edge of what used to be a mining road. One trading post, a boarded-up church, and a crooked row of homes mostly held up by memory and rusted nails. But there was one thing here they needed. A name. Luis Renteria. The last honest magistrate this side of the state line, retired, broken, maybe dangerous. But he had signed the original boundary maps. He knew the history behind the claims. They reached his place by midday. A small house on the far edge tucked between two cypress trees and the carcass of a Model T truck. No horses, no dogs barking, just a flicker of smoke from the chimney and the faint sound of coughing behind the walls. Nioke stepped up to the door and knocked. They waited. The door opened slowly, revealing a man in a threadbare shirt and suspenders, face sallow cheeks, half-hollowed by illness. But his eyes sharp, unmistakable. "Which one of you's bleeding?" he asked, voice dry as paper. "We're not," Nioke said. "Then come back when you are. That's when people tell the truth." He started to close the door, but Isabella stepped forward. "You signed the Duarte line in '94. I have the original map. You marked it with a silver coin and a straight edge." Renteria paused, hands still on the door. "Who told you that, my father?" His gaze narrowed. "Name Sebastian Duarte." The door opened wider. Inside the house was dim, the windows covered with old Navajo blankets and tattered curtains. It smelled of wood smoke, boiled sage, and sickness. Renteria motioned for them to sit around a warped table stacked with newsprint and empty bottles. "I thought he was dead," he said, pouring hot water into mismatched mugs. "He is," Isabella answered. "What's left of his land? Enough to die over." Renteria gave a faint chuckle. "Still full of thorns, that valley. That's why I marked it in the first place. Meant to scare men off." Nioke laid out the documents. Renteria didn't touch them, just looked. "I recognize my hand," he said, "and my mark. That coin belonged to my brother. I pressed it under the parchment so it'd leave a dent. Not legal, just habit." "It's enough," Isabella said. "Maybe. But Ignacio Salvatierra's not a man who plays by enough. He plays by ownership," Nioke muttered. "People or land makes no difference." Renteria sat back. "I used to think men like him would burn themselves out eventually, like wildfire that eats its own trees. But they don't. They spread. Because we let him." "Then help us stop him," Isabella said. He coughed hard into a cloth. When he looked up, there was blood on it. He didn't flinch. "You want me to testify?" "Yes," Nioke said. "You're the only one left who knows how the boundary was laid. If you speak to the judge, the others will have to listen." Renteria looked at the fireplace for a long moment. "My wife," he said quietly, "was buried 3 winters ago because Ignacio poisoned the well she drank from. Not with words, with waste. Runoff from his refinery outside San Jorge. Killed the whole crop. Killed our cows. Killed her." Silence blanketed the room. "He came to my door after. Said I could name a price and move. Said I was lucky I had no children." Isabella's hand curled into a fist on the table. "What did you say?" she asked. Renteria turned to her, his eyes wet but fierce. "I said I could choose to be a wound or be the scar." He pushed back from the table and stood. "I'll ride with you. I'll speak. But don't expect applause. The world doesn't reward scars. It forgets them. They left that night. Renteria rode a mule, hunched but steady. Ina secured the papers in an oilskin pouch beneath her blouse. Mateo took point with Nyoke, sweeping the trail for any sign of ambush. Isabella stayed close to Lucia, whose fever had returned with a vengeance. By morning, the girl could barely lift her head. "She's burning up," Ina said, holding Lucia's face in her hands. Her breaths short. "There's a clinic in Pueblito Viejo," Renteria said. "Not much, but they'll take her." "We can't split," Isabella said. "You have to," Ina replied. "She needs care. You and Nyoke take the magistrate to Magdalena. Mateo and I will take Lucia." "I don't want to leave her," Isabella whispered. "You're not. You're giving her a future." Isabella leaned down, pressing her forehead to Lucia's. "Listen to Ina, little bird. I'll be back soon. I promise." Lucia opened her eyes, glassy and slow. "You smell like ash," she murmured. "I know. It's almost over." They parted without fanfare, just long looks and silent promises. Ina and Mateo veered east with the mule disappearing into the golden haze. Isabella, Nyoke, and Renteria pressed north toward Magdalena. They camped on the old ridge that night, fires kept low, no light but the stars. Renteria sat on a stump, wrapped in a wool blanket, face lit faintly by the coals. He stared into the dark, silent, for a long time. "She'll change things," he said quietly. Lucia, Isabella asked. "No. You." "I'm just finishing what my father started." "No," he said again. "You're fixing what he couldn't. Because you were made from the part of him that never gave in." Isabella didn't answer. Her throat felt thick. Nyoke watched her from across the fire. "Tomorrow we face them," he said. Isabella nodded. "And we don't flinch." "No. We leave marks." The wind shifted, brushing through the scrub like breath. Renteria smiled faintly. "Let them hear the ghosts coming," and the stars above seemed to burn brighter for it. "They brought guns. We brought truth. Let's see which one they fear more." The first bell of the morning hadn't yet rung in Magdalena, but the square was already filling. Word had spread quiet, as a rumor sharp as a blade, that the Salvatierra case was reopening. Not in whispers anymore. This time it was happening in daylight. Vendors didn't set up their carts. No horses tied to the rail. Just townsfolk lining the edges of the plaza, their mouths closed and their eyes wide as if watching for smoke on the horizon. A storm they could smell but not yet see. Isabella stood beside the courthouse steps, leather folder tight under her arm, her father's map and letter sealed inside. Her dress was simple brown cotton, with the dust of 3 days' travel still clinging to it. She hadn't changed. She wanted them to see her just like this. Nyoke stood at her right. Luis Renteria at her left, propped against his cane face, pale but eyes unflinching. Behind them, the church doors hung open, a silent invitation for the truth to step forward or be swallowed whole. From the northern road, Ignacio came. He rode a pale gray horse flanked by 4 armed men. His lawyer walked behind him carrying a black case that gleamed like tar. The crowd parted as they passed, but no one bowed their head. Not this time. Isabella didn't move. When Ignacio dismounted, he met her eyes and smiled, slow and smug. "You look tired. You look afraid." His smile didn't waver, but his jaw flexed once. He turned and strode into the courthouse. The others followed. The judge was already inside. Nyoke touched Isabella's shoulder lightly. "We ready?" She nodded once. "They brought guns. We brought truth. Let's see which one they fear more." Inside the courthouse was warm and still. Wooden benches creaked as people settled in. No room for lawyers' theatrics or guards' intimidation. Just a high bench, an old gavel, and the weight of what came next. The judge looked over the room, then spoke. This case concerns the rightful ownership of the Duarte lands west of Magdalena. Evidence has been submitted. Testimonies have been heard. Today, we conclude. He nodded toward Ignacio's lawyer. Final statement. The man stood and buttoned his coat, voice crisp. My client legally purchased the contested lands under contract registered in the regional office. The opposing party's claim is based on documents with questionable provenance and unverifiable witnesses. The original landowner, Sebastian Duarte, never acknowledged the claimant as kin, nor submitted any transfer of property through official channels. He paused, turned slightly to Isabella. This is a tale, nothing more. One that asks this court to elevate sentiment over law. He sat. The judge looked to Isabella. She rose. Judge, she began, her voice clear. You've seen the letter from my father. You've seen the original deed notarized, dated, sealed. You've heard Miguel Carranza admit he sealed it in fear, and you saw the evidence he carried all these years. She took a step forward. But we brought one more voice. She motioned to Renteria. The room shifted. Whispers stilled. He stood slow and stiff, gripping the table for balance. I am Luis Renteria, he said, voice rough but steady. Former magistrate of Pueblito Norte. I marked the Duarte boundary in 1894 with my own hand and seal. I have no stake in this outcome. No blood, no land, no coin, only memory. He drew a breath. And I remember Sebastian Duarte bringing me the deed. I remember marking it. And I remember when men came knocking to bury it. Men who worked for Ignacio Salvatierra. He locked eyes with Ignacio. I remember your face. The courtroom held its breath. Renteria sat. The silence cracked like thunder. The judge looked to Isabella again. Do you wish to add anything? She opened the leather folder and placed the letter, the map, and the deed on the table. I'm not here for revenge, she said. I'm here because a promise was made not just to me, but to people who lived there, people who had nothing else. My father didn't give me riches. He gave me land, because land is a place where people grow roots or die trying. She looked toward the back of the room. The townspeople were watching. No one moved. She met the judge's eyes again. We brought the truth, that's all. She sat. The judge took his time reviewing the documents. He leaned forward, inspecting the seals, the dates, the marks. Finally, he set the papers down and looked across the room. This court finds in favor of Isabella Ruiz Duarte. The words landed like a drop of rain on scorched soil. The bench behind her erupted, not with cheers, not yet, but with murmurs. Relief, shock, gratitude held too long. Ignacio stood, eyes fixed on the judge. His voice was cold. This is a mistake. The judge replied without pause. Then you may appeal, but you will not trespass that land again until the appeals court rules. Nyoke stepped closer, a quiet warning in every line of his body. Ignacio's hand moved toward his coat. So did three others. The judge banged the gavel once sharp. Enough. Everyone froze. Ignacio stared at Isabella for a long moment. You've made enemies today. She stood. No. You've just lost something you thought you'd stolen. He turned, muttering to his men. They followed him out like a pack without teeth. The crowd began to move slow at first, then gathering. Not to threaten, to bear witness, to remember. Renteria stood shakily. Nioke helped him down the steps. Isabella walked out into the square. The sun was full now, high and brilliant. She looked up. It felt like breathing again after holding it in too long. Nioke stood beside her. "They'll try again," he said. She nodded. "Let them." Ina was waiting near the edge of the square. Matteo beside her. Lucia in her arms, her cheeks pink with color, her eyes brighter. Isabella ran to them. Lucia reached for her. "You came back. I promised, didn't I?" The girl nodded, wrapping her arms around her neck. Anna smiled, tears slipping free without shame. "She's stronger than she looks. So are we." The town hadn't cheered. It hadn't shouted. But people began to move forward, neighbors, ranchers, elders, faces lined with time and dust, each offering a nod, a handshake, a murmur of thanks. Not for victory, but for the proof that it was possible. Truth had walked through guns and stayed standing. They don't forgive women who win. It started with the fire. Not the kind that spread fast, not one that tore through the hills in a screaming blaze. No, this one was slow, controlled, intentional. Lit in the dead of night near the south fence of the Duarte land. A warning dressed as a brush fire. The message was old as time. You were told to stay quiet. By the time Isabella reached the edge of the pasture, flames were curling up dry stalks of ocotillo and creeping toward the oldest fig tree. Nioke and Matteo were already there, shoveling dirt, stomping embers, beating the fire back with wet blankets. She grabbed a bucket and joined them without a word. The smoke clawed at her throat. Her eyes watered. But the flames died. They always did. By morning, the air still smelled of ash. Ina sat on the porch, sharpening a blade that hadn't seen use in years. The whetstone scraped steady against the metal. Lucia played nearby, arranging rocks in a circle, like a ritual only she understood. No one talked about what had happened. They didn't need to. The judge's ruling had held. The land was legally hers now. But law only stretched as far as courage could carry it, and fear was already crawling its way back into town. 2 nights after the fire, Renteria was found beaten outside his home in Los Molinos. Alive, but barely. His ribs cracked, one eye swollen shut. The magistrate who had stood tall now lay in a clinic bed whispering apologies through broken teeth. "They got to him," Ina said. "Took their time doing it too. They want us scared," Isabella said. "No, they want us small, quiet." Nioke stood behind her, arms crossed, staring at the ridgeline like he could see them coming. "They don't forgive women who win," Ina added, "especially not a woman with land and a voice." Isabella didn't sleep that night. She walked the edge of the property, hand resting on the hilt of the small knife Nioke had given her. "Not for battle," he'd said. "Just to remind you who you are." The moon was sharp in the sky. Coyotes howled far off. But she didn't turn back. Not until the eastern horizon started bleeding orange. At sunrise, the town's only newspaper printed a headline that stopped her cold: "Judge Santiago missing. Home burned." The article was brief. Just enough words to say the judge hadn't been seen in 2 days. His home, an adobe structure near the magistrate's office, had gone up in flames late the previous night. No body found. No suspects. No justice. The land title was still valid. For now. But with the judge gone, the door cracked open again. Nioke read the article in silence, jaw locked tight. Matteo stared at the print like it might suddenly rearrange into something less terrifying. Lucia sat in Isabella's lap, head resting on her shoulder. "What do we do now?" Matteo asked. "We do what they don't expect," Isabella said, "which is speak louder." She called a gathering. Word spread fast, first through whispers, then through louder voices, until even those afraid to look her in the eye were walking the trail to the Duarte land. They came slowly in pairs, in groups, women holding children, men with worn hats in their hands, the old and the restless. By dusk, they filled the pasture near the fig tree standing on the scorched ground, as if reclaiming it with their feet. Isabella stood on a flat rock, not higher than them, just visible. "This land is mine," she began, voice firm, "but that doesn't mean I stand on it alone." She waited. "You all know what Ignacio has done. Some of you have suffered because of it. Some of you have stayed quiet because you thought it was the safest way to survive." She looked out over the crowd. "But survival without dignity isn't living. And if they come for one of us, they will come for all of us." Murmurs spread through the group. "I didn't win anything," she continued. "We did. Together, we told the truth, and they tried to burn it down. They still might. But every time we speak, every time we stand on this ground and say it matters, we win again." Silence. Then a woman stepped forward. Her name was Marta, a widow whose son had disappeared 2 years ago after refusing to sell his field to Ignacio's men. She said nothing, just nodded. Another came, then a third, and then they stayed. Not all. Not yet. But enough. That night, Nyoke patrolled the perimeter rifle slung low, watching the tree line for movement. Mateo stayed with Lucia inside the main house. Ina boiled water and listened to the radio even though the static outweighed the sound. Isabella stood in the doorway, arms crossed, heart steady. "Ignacio won't stop," she said quietly. No, Ina replied. "But now he knows you won't either." "I'm scared." "Good. Means you're still human." "I don't want anyone else to get hurt." "They already have," Ina said. "The question is whether it was worth something. And I think it is." Before dawn, Ignacio sent a message. A wooden cross, charred at the edges, driven into the soil near the pasture. A single red ribbon tied to it. No note, no signature. But none was needed. Nyoke yanked it out and smashed it against a rock. Isabella didn't flinch. She looked at the empty spot it left behind and said, "That's the last threat they make in silence." And then she turned to face the wind. Not because it was over, but because it wasn't. Some things you plant knowing you'll never sit in their shade. The fig tree bloomed again that spring. New leaves pushed through the charred branches like quiet defiance. Tiny green shoots softened the blackened limbs. Lucia noticed them first, running out barefoot into the morning light, her little voice rising with wonder. "Look, Mama, it's not dead." Isabella stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a flour-stained towel. She shaded her eyes against the sun and looked. She didn't smile right away. She just watched the leaves, watched them shiver gently in the breeze, their color impossibly fresh. Then she nodded once. "No, mija, it's not." The rains had come late that year. The land, stubborn and proud, had taken its time drinking it in. But when it did, things began to shift. The hills softened. The wildflowers returned in patches. Water trickled back into the arroyo behind the western fence line. And people came back too. Some had never really left. They'd just kept their distance, waiting to see if the world would hold. Others returned with slow steps, carrying tools, grain sacks, chickens under one arm. They didn't ask for permission. They just looked Isabella in the eye, and when she nodded, they began again. No promises, just work. Mateo helped rebuild the fence line, hands blistered but steady. He'd grown taller in the months since the trial. Quieter, too. There was something in him now, a kind of gravity. Ina stayed, of course, claimed one of the outer rooms as hers, and took charge of everything from the goats to the soup pot. She watched over Lucia with a grandmother's ferocity and tolerated no nonsense from anyone else. Nyoke built a shelter up the hill, nothing fancy, just stone and old cedar. He still walked the perimeter every night, rifle slung low, but less like a soldier and more like a sentinel, watching not just for threats, but for signs of something better. The town had changed, too. Magdalena held its first open town meeting in years. New names appeared on the council list. Ignacio's lawyer packed up his office and left town with no announcement. Ignacio himself was seen only once after the trial, riding past the plaza, face-hidden boots, dusty-looking straight ahead. He didn't stop. The courthouse never overturned the decision. Too many eyes on it now. Too many people ready to speak. But some losses never reversed. Judge Santiago was never found. Renteria remained bedridden. His words gone, but he smiled when he heard about the co-op forming along the Duarte land, 5 families working soil once left to rot. They thought it'd burn, he rasped to Isabella during a visit. But some things don't burn easy. She brought him a cutting from the fig tree. He wept when he saw it. One morning in June, a woman arrived from the border. Her name was Teresa. She wore jeans and a bandana and carried a child on her hip. No papers. No husband. Just a name Ina had told her to come. She stood at the edge of the property until Isabella approached. "I'm not asking for charity," Teresa said. "Just a place to begin." Isabella looked down at the little boy. He had eyes like her brother's, sharp and unsure. "You've already begun," she said, and led her in. That evening they shared stew and cornbread under the fig tree. Teresa told her story. Others added their own. By firelight, it all blurred grief, hope, memory. They listened. Then they sang. Not hymns, not protest songs, just old melodies the land remembered. Later that night, Isabella stood alone at the edge of the ridge. The stars were clean and sharp, the wind brushing her cheeks like breath. Nyoke joined her arms folded, silence comfortable between them. "She's growing up fast," he said. "Lucia, she's already stronger than we ever were." Isabella nodded. "She'll have roots now." Nyoke glanced toward the valley. "You're building something they can't touch." "I'm just holding the line." "No, you're planting something." She looked at him. He tilted his head toward the fig tree. That tree, someone put it in the ground, knowing they might never taste its fruit, might never sit in its shade. But they did it anyway. Isabella turned her eyes toward the land. The fences, the cabins rising, the new shoots of green pushing through scorched soil. "Some things you plant," she murmured, "knowing you'll never sit in their shade. But you plant them anyway." He nodded. "And you guard them. So they grow." She didn't cry. Not this time. Her grief had shifted less like a wound, more like a scar with purpose. It anchored her. She leaned against him slightly, just enough to say she was here and still standing. Behind them, the porch creaked as Lucia stepped out. "Mama, I'm here, little bird." Lucia pointed up at the sky. "A shooting star." Isabella looked up. A streak of silver split the darkness for a second, then vanished. "Make a wish," Lucia said. Isabella knelt beside her. "I don't need to," she said. It already came true. They stood there together, 3 figures outlined in starlight, as the wind carried the scent of fig leaves and mesquite down into the valley, and the land for the first time in a long time was quiet. Not with fear, with peace.